Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all? Is everything working properly?
We can hear you.
Okay, so hello. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar from Data to Action, REWET Insights on Restoring Wetlands. So, first, I'm going to explain you a bit the agenda of today of this webinar. Now we are currently in the welcome session, and then we will start with all the presentations. Okay, the first presentation corresponds to greenhouse gases emission from wetland restored wetlands, influence of soil and water properties by Sara Benelli and Marco Bartoli from the University of Parma. The next presentation is about greenhouse gas measurement techniques, quantifying ecosystem fluxes with Eddy Covariance by Kadir Ildiz from the University of Tartu. And we will continue then with the carbon dioxide and methane exchange in two re-rewetted Estonian bogs 7 years post-restoration by Sala Tenhovirta from the University of Tartu, representing our sister project, ALFAwetlands. We will continue then with the biodiversity presentation, ground beetles as wetland restoration indicators, by Ralph Bertonstott from the Guggenheim Environmental Research from the university. The next presentation is about modeling biodiversity and ecosystem services under future climate scenarios by Eulogio Chacón from the Climate Research Foundation. And the last one presentation before the coffee break is about WETSET, your one-stop shop for European wetlands data by Juan Serratosa from IDNR. Then we will have a short break. And then we will continue with the presentations, okay? The next one will be the social monitoring preliminary results by Patrick Graf from the Catholic University of Leuven. We will continue with the policy for wetland restoration by Caspar Berber and Hannah Porada from the International Union for Conservation of Nature in Netherlands. Then, and the final one, I regret to express that Lisa finally is not available to join today. So after the policy session, there will be the closing remarks, and there will be a room for questions and answers, and I will be moderating that part. So this is all from the agenda, and now I'm going to present our two first speakers. They are Marco and Sara. Marco is a full professor at the University of Parma and the leader of the REWET working group on water and soil analysis. And Sara Benelli is a biogeochemist broadly interested in the cycles of major elements such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and silica, and how they are regulated by environmental factors. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Parma, and within REWET, she coordinates field and laboratory activities at Open Lab number 6, the Usola Oxbow Lake. And they are both passionate scientists dedicated to wetland restoration. So, Marco and Sara, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Fran. Good morning, everybody. Today the talk is about the influence of soil and water properties and how they influence the greenhouse gas emission from restored wetlands. Just a few brief introduction. Global climate warming is one of the most serious environmental challenge of our time, driven by greenhouse gas emission, in particular due to to the anthropogenic activities. And among the terrestrial ecosystem, wetlands cover only the 5 to 8% of the surface area, but they can store more than 20-30% of the global soil carbon. And so when they are intact, the wetlands can act as a long-term carbon sinks. They support biodiversity and can regulate the water and the nutrient cycles. However, the decades of drainage and agriculture have turned many wetlands from to be carbon sink to carbon sources. And a common consequence of the wetland degradation is the lowering of the water table, and that means that the soil is exposed, and the organic matter can be decomposed by their by aerobic decomposition, so thanks to the oxygen. And this results in the emission of mainly CO2, as you can see from the graphs, and N2O. While when the soil are saturated with water, and so the wetlands is covered by a layer of the water, the composition of organic matter change and switch to the anaerobic metabolism. And the main products of this metabolism is methane. You can, we have to be aware that the quantity and the fluxes of these three gases is different. In fact, from this review, you can see that methane is generally 10 times lower than CO2, while the nitrous oxide is even 3 orders of magnitude lower than CO2. However, they have a much higher global warming potential. In fact, that means that they have much more impact on the climate. And so, according to this power that they have in global warming, we can express the greenhouse gas fluxes and emission as total equivalent total CO2 equivalent. And as you can see from this review, that take into account a global reservoir of wetlands, you can see that the lowest emission that we have is when the water table of the wetland is very close to the surface. And in this case, the wetland can be again shifted to be carbon sink and not anymore carbon source. And so what do we mean by rewetting? Just a few words, as we are biogeochemists, we know more the mechanism that can produce these emissions. And so when we have a drain wetland, as in this schematic, we have the air that enter into the soil, and this oxygen that is present in the atmosphere can be used to decompose the organic matter. And so it produces mainly CO2 and N2O, as you can see from the large size of the arrows. However, when the water enter into the particle of the soils, the oxygen is has diffused much slower, and so the decomposition is even slower, and it increases the anaerobic process, and that generally produce methane and other products that we will see in a while. And both the saturated and unsaturated soil differently increase the emission of greenhouse gases. And generally, the composition of organic matter follow a redox sequence, as you can see from the graph on the right. And when the organic matter is decomposed by the aerobic metabolism, bacteria use oxygen to decompose fully organic matter fully oxidized, and this produces CO2. But when oxygen is limited, then microbes has to choose from other electron receptors that are here reported that are less favorable for the microbes and have much more difficulty to degrade this organic matter. So in condition of suboxic condition, generally we have denitrifier and nitrifiers that decompose the organic matter, producing as a byproduct N2O. This is a powerful greenhouse gas. And then when all the electroreceptors more favorable to degrade organic matter are consumed, we have that bacteria choose CO2 to decompose the organic matter, and they produce methane. So all this emission that we have are generally due to different factors. And here we just add some of them in both soil and waters. Most of them are present both in the soil and in the water. We just want to focus on some of them that we measure also in our project. And so just a quick overview of what is this factor can affect the fluxes. Here we reported some theoretical trends in which when we increase when the water is rich in nutrients, we expect to have much higher fluxes of greenhouse gases. And the same trend we can find when the temperature increases, because with the warmer temperature we have generally the activity of bacteria is much faster, and so they can increase the fluxes of greenhouse gases. While an opposite trend we can find when we have high organic matter ratio, so CN ratio, that it means that when we have high organic carbon content, such as high refractory or recalcitrant organic matter, such as what we have generally in the peatlands, the fluxes, we expect that the fluxes are lower, since this organic matter is difficult to be degraded by the bacteria. In fact, in the opposite side, in case we have organic matter that is rich in nitrogen, we have much higher fluxes, because in this case the organic matter is much more labile and easy to degrade by the bacteria. About water saturation is a very important factor. We saw just a few slides before, and in case the soil is saturated with the water, we switch the metabolism from mainly aerobic metabolism to anaerobic, that it produces methane mainly as products. And so we are in our project, in the REWET project, we have 7 different wetlands, that differ for hydrology, for origin, and for the management history that they have. They are distributed across Europe, and in all of them we measure greenhouse gases. In 5 of them with the Covariance tower, and in 2 of them only with the portable gas analyzers due to logistical constraints. But in the next presentation, our colleague will explain much more about greenhouse gas measurements. And in all of this wetland, we collect also soil and water samples. These wetlands are different in typology. As I mentioned, we have in the north of Europe, in Finland and in Estonia, 2 peatlands. In the Netherlands and in Portugal, we have former peatlands that are now more agricultural soil, so they are affected by nutrient-rich water. And in Austria, we have grassland ecosystem that is like floodplain that is sometimes inundated by the close river. And in Belgium, we have a floodplain that was drained and now is going to be restored. While in Italy, where we are working, we have an oxbow lake that was recently, during the REWET project, reconnected to the river, and so is not more so is isolated. What is the objective of this project is to restore this wetland by rewetting. So all of them are undergoing rewetting during the project to mitigate greenhouse gases and restore these ecological functions. And so what we do with all this data that we collect, we try to understand how our open lab are distributed along these environmental parameters. And among the soil parameters, organic nitrogen, organic carbon, and CN molar ratio all load strongly in the same direction. And here we found this trend is especially clear for the Open Lab 4, that is the Estonian peatlands, that is characterized mainly by high organic content of carbon, because it's mainly peat, so it's a very refractory organic matter. Turning to the water parameters, we have in the other side of the graph nitrate and oxygen concentration that drive more these parameters, and we find Open Lab number 6, that is the Open Lab is the aquatic Open Lab in which the water is mainly oxygenated and nitrate rich due to the influence of the river. And what do we do with this data? We try to understand which factors can affect more the greenhouse gas fluxes. And here there is an example from our Open Lab. And as you can see, most of the CO2 and methane fluxes are driven by the factor like alkalinity and are in the opposite direction of, for example, nitrate. And that implying that there's more reduced condition, in particular in this station that we sample in the Oxbow Lake. While in the other side of the plot, you can see N2Os. N2O fluxes are saturation in this case are mainly driven by the oxygen concentration and the temperature, and this is implying that N2O emission are strongly related to the oxygenated condition, and in this case, it can be produced by a process like nitrification. And we don't only measure in our Open Lab greenhouse gases from the water, but we also try to understand when there is no connection between the Oxbow Lake and the river, how this exposed soil behaves. And what we found is that when the soil is dry, and so it's mainly sandy sediment in sandy soil in this case, and the predominant flux is the one of CO2. While when we go more along this water saturation gradient, it increases the fluxes of methane, as we said before, in the presence of water that cannot, so the oxygen diffuse much slower. We have more products from the anaerobic metabolism. And 2 in this case doesn't show a clear trend, and we can say that both the nitrification, denitrification, so the process from aerobic and anaerobic metabolism can produce this byproduct. So just to conclude, we can say that the rewetting is efficiently restoring wetlands, so the ecological function and the capacity to behave like act like a sink for the carbon. And that response to rewetting is not uniform, but is depend on local hydrological and biochemical and climatic condition. And so the challenge is to find this hydrological balance in all our wetlands that we are studying. And so that, just to conclude, that rewetting is not just an ecosystem restoration, but can be used as a strategy to mitigate the climate change. So with this, we finish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the presentation. Very interesting, very clear. And now it's time for the presentation on greenhouse gases measurement techniques, quantifying ecosystem fluxes with Eddy covariance by Kadir Yildiz from the University of Tartu. So please, Kadir, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry. Let me just introduce you a little bit more because I know you pretty well, but we are in an online webinar. So Kadir is a PhD student and junior research fellow in ecotechnology at the University of Tartu, the Department of Geography. And his research focuses on greenhouse gases fluxes and energy fluxes, particularly in non-restored and restored peatland ecosystems. And he investigates how land use change influence carbon and methane dynamics using Eddy covariance and closed chamber measurements. Now it is Terry.
Thank you so much, Fran. So I would like to share my presentation for now. Can you see it now clearly?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Let me try again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Now it is.
So thank you, Fran. So I'm going to give a small presentation today about the greenhouse gas measurement techniques, especially about Eddy covariance, which is quantifying ecosystem fluxes with Eddy covariance. So I'm Kadir Yildiz from University of Tartu. So first of all, I would like to start with the general overview about what is Eddy covariance, what this system is capable to do in general. Then I will go through about our Estonian Open Lab. So what is Eddy covariance first? The Eddy covariance is actually a micrometeorological technique that used to measure to exchange gases, energy, and momentum between ecosystem and atmosphere. And this system provides actually direct and high frequency and in-situ measurements of fluxes such as carbon dioxide, methane, and water, sensible heat flux, and also the latent heat flux as well. So what is the core principle of the Eddy covariance first? It's actually turbulent air particles, which we call them eddies, transport scalars like CO2 concentration, temperature, and humidity. So eddy covariance actually quantifies the fluxes by computing this eddy covariance between vertical wind speed and the scalar fluctuations at really high frequency, to 10 to 20 hertz, which means 10 or 20 times per second. And why is important? It's because this eddy covariance actually captures the real-time ecosystem atmosphere interactions, and it provides continuous and non-destructive measurements all over ecosystem. And it's also fundamental for the better understanding for carbon balance, water cycles, and energy exchange in any terrestrial ecosystems and wetlands. So what is the pros and cons of eddy covariance? So on the left side, you see the pros of the eddy covariance, which actually capable to do some direct measurements of the gas and energy fluxes all over ecosystem. So it has really high temporal resolution, 10 to 20 hertz, which is also have some smaller temporal resolutions to 2 or 5 hertz actually. But nowadays, it's really common to have 10 to 20 hertz temporal resolution. So it's also eddy covariance capable to do non-destructive and continuous monitoring, which is really important that we have listened some previous measurements was about the closed chamber. It was really useful for the for this project as well. But the main differences between the closed chamber and the eddy covariance, actually, they are both measuring the greenhouse gases, but eddy covariance has do some continuous monitoring. And it also covers large ecosystem footprint. Eddy covariance is also essential for the carbon balance, water, and energy cycle studies, and it's also standardized globally, and which are the pros of the eddy covariance techniques. So what about the cons? It actually requires flat, homogeneous terrain and sufficient turbulence for the better flux computing. So also these analyzers are actually expensive, need high cost of the instruments and maintenance. And the data processing of the eddy covariance is actually very complex. It requires some specialty to have some to do this data processing for the gap filling or spectral corrections, etc. So it's this systems also really depends on energy demand and then power sensitivity. It's really important for the eddy covariance system because it can ruin all the system by small power supply changes. So data gaps during the low turbulence, especially during nighttime or rain or instrument failures, is actually one of the biggest problem and the cons in the eddy covariance system. And also footprint varies with wind and surface conditions, which means spatial uncertainty. But nowadays there are some recent studies about the spatial uncertainty, but now we are working more on the spatial uncertainty and spatial heterogeneity as well regarding this, combining this closed chamber data set and also inside of the footprint area with also with eddy covariance. So eddy covariance in REWET project, as Sarah mentioned also before me, thank you for that, but I don't need to explain all the 7 open labs. She already explained all of them. But in that 7 open labs, we 5 out of 7 REWET open lab have eddy covariance flux towers, which are Estonia, Finland, Austria, the Netherlands, and the Portugal. And we have continuous measurements from these 5 open labs. And then also Italy and Belgium open labs has closed chamber measurements, as Sarah also mentioned before. So I'm going to go through with our Estonian open lab 4, which we call them ESO. Where's the ESO? ESO is actually located southeast of Estonia. And this area is actually, as you can see on the right side, it's all this yellow lined area is actually restored, and some of them is actually remained as a non-restored for the see how it changed. And this area is actually restored in 2017, and our eddy covariance also located on the south part of this restored peatlands. So what we are doing in ESO restored peatland, we have eddy covariance flux tower measurements continuously since the end of the 2023, and we also have more than 1 full year biweekly closed chamber measurements. And besides that, we are also measuring the water physical chemical parameters in ESO peatland with the piezometer. As you can see on the right side of the pictures, I don't know if you can see on my pointers, but on top we have eddy covariance flux over in that SO, and on in the bottom we are also measuring the greenhouse gases by closed chamber, opaque and transparent chambers for the spatial heterogeneity. And and also we are also measuring the water physical chemical parameters inside of this piezometer pipes. So here are some of the results from the Estonian OpenLab ESO. On the left, figure 1 shows that 30-minute averaged CO2 and methane fluxes, micromole per square meter per second. And on the left, it shows already more than 1.5 year data set since from the end of the 2023 until June of 2025. As you can see on the on top, CO2 and methane, we have some gaps, data gaps, especially during the winter times. It's because in ESO, maybe I need to explain more about the study site as well. In ESO, we don't have a continuous power supply. We are using some kind of solar panels for the energy supply. And in Estonia, we are in the Nordic area, which means that winters are hard and difficult, and we have really small times of the daylight during the winter. And it's also, it causes some kind of data gaps, especially during the winter time. But when you look at the overall the data set, it shows that especially during the summertime, it's more active times for regarding the ESO, because as I said, during the winter time, these ecosystems are actually going to sleep. But on the right side, we have done some kind of gap filling, as I said before. So this kind of data processing requires some kind of expertise. And one of our expert has done data gap filling with the artificial neural network method. On the right side, you can see clearly that ARIA is actually still acting as a small carbon source on top of CO2 and the methane. It shows that this ARIA is acting as a carbon source, but really small amount of data that we have, a small amount of carbon releasing from that ESO. After 7 year, almost 8 years of restoration, this area is still recovering itself, and also vegetation recovery is still ongoing in ESO. That's why this is one of the main reason this area is acting as a carbon source. And also water table was not very stable during the couple of years ago. That there was a big drought, not a drought, but during the summertime it was really dry, and also the springtime. It's also affecting the vegetation recovery in ESO, which cause this area is still recovering to itself to shift into carbon source after restoration. What is the flux drivers in ESO? One of our colleagues, Ilyona, has done this study for her paper. On the upper part of the graph, you see the carbon. This is the spearmint rank correlation analysis on ESO's eddy covariance data. On the upper part of the graph, it shows the carbon fluxes, spearmint rank correlation. It shows that the biggest positive correlation that we have with the carbon is relative humidity, and the biggest negative correlation is actually about the sensible heat flux in ESO. But as I know that, especially for the methane fluxes, it works better for the strength correlation test, which shows that the highest positive correlation in between fluxes and the other variables is the highest one is the air temperature, as you see in here actually. And also long wave outgoing radiation is also the biggest main drivers in the methane fluxes in ESO peatland. So one of our study also the energy fluxes from ESO, because as I mentioned before, the eddy covariance is actually capable to measure also greenhouse gases, also the energy fluxes as well. But what is the energy fluxes? That means actually sensible heat flux, latent heat flux, net radiation, which are equal to that means all of them is energy fluxes. One of our studies, we are just working on the energy balance closure. That means how equal the coming energy and the reflecting energy. If they are equal to each other, that means the energy balance closure is the one. equal to 1, which is the best energy balance closer. In that study, you can see in the the comparison between Eso and Lavasara, what are these sites? As I mentioned before, Eso, but Lavasara is one of the non-restored and highly densely vegetated, non-restored and abundant peatland, also in Estonia, on the western part of Estonia. And here you can see on the energy balance closer ratio, especially during the summertime. This is one of the preliminary results, actually. But the Lavasara is densely vegetated, but non-restored area is doing better than Eso regarding the energy balance closer. On the right table, you can see also seasonal energy balance closer performance at Eso and Lavasara, which means Eso, especially during the growing season, as you can see, Lavasara is doing really good. Closer ratio is really close to 1. But in Eso still 0.6, which are still lower than the non-restored but highly vegetated area. That means vegetation recovery is one of the most important thing in energy balance closer, also greenhouse gases. That's why we are expecting some more vegetation recovery in Eso in upcoming years, which means that makes this vegetation recovery makes this area shift into the carbon source in upcoming years, that we hope. And in conclude, in general, what is about Eddy covariance is actually one of the most sufficient technique for the better understanding of the carbon and energy cycles of ecosystem. So vegetation recovery still in progress in Eso. And Eso restored peatlands still acting as a carbon source after 8 years of restoration, which is also really good. In the next presentation, we will see our one of the sister project, ALFAwetlands, also about the some of the restored peatlands in Estonia, which we can compare the other sites as well. And regarding the energy balance closer, Eso is not doing good compared to densely vegetated non-restored peatlands. So we are hoping to get recovering this vegetation fastly in Eso, then it makes this ecosystem is better. So thank you for listening. This is all from my side.
Okay, so now it's time to continue with the webinar, and the next presentation is about carbon dioxide and methane exchange into re-rewetted Estonian box 7 years post-restoration by Sala Tenhovirta. Wait a second, because Sala Tenhovirta is an ecosystem researcher specializing in greenhouse gases fluxes in forest and peatlands. Her work spans 3 mediated methane cycles and peat decomposition processes, and she currently investigates greenhouse gases balances of restored peatlands as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Tartu. Sala is also representing our sister project, ALFAwetlands. So, Sarah, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. What can you see in my screen? Can you see what you're supposed to see? You can now see the first slide. Can you hear me
yes,
also?
Everything
okay.
is going perfect.
Everything is perfect. Yes, so I'm representing ALFAwetlands project here, which is wetland restoration for the future. So the ultimate goal of ALFAwetlands is to improve the geospatial knowledge base of wetlands, to evaluate the pathways of wetland restoration that incorporate a co-creation process, and to provide information and indicators for sustainability to maximize climate change mitigation, biodiversity, and other benefits. Quickly showing you here are the overview of our partners, and ALFAwetlands still continues almost to the end of next year, so we still have time to see some new results. And I hail from work package 3, which is efficiency to innovative ecosystem scale restoration practices, which is led by my boss Kaido Soosar from Tartu. But now I'm gonna show you some early-ish results from our chamber-based measurements in Estonia, one of the Estonian sites of ALFAwetlands. But to give it a bit of a background, so these sites that I'm working on are forested, drained and forested peatland sites. So I have 2 sites. So the premise for this forested and drained peatland is that when the water table goes down, the carbon dioxide flux from the soil goes up because the peat starts to decompose, but also the trees are uptaking some CO2 to balance that out. And when the ditches are blocked to re-wet and restore, the carbon storage in the peat is safe, or is it? We hope that it will be safe in the underwater, but the methane flux from the soil increases back to the levels or ish to the levels of the non-drained side. So from the perspective of climate change, the goals for these restorations is to return these previously drained sites back to those that weren't drained, so to the previous stages of the greenhouse gas fluxes. So, as I mentioned, I have 2 data from 2 sites in Estonia, Valgeraba and Kuresoo, and they are a bit different sites. Kuresoo site was drained in 60s and 70s. It was supposed to become a peat extraction site, but the peat extraction was never started. So actually in Kuresoo, the natural and re-wetted sites are relatively close to each other and have been for over some time, whereas in Valgeraba site, the restoration was done to a site that had a full-grown forest that was clear-cut and the ditches were blocked. So in Valgeraba, the natural and restored sites are currently quite different in terms of vegetation, and also when compared to Kuresoo sites, they have a different history because they all Valgeraba had a forest and the soil was exposed to litter and everything from the trees. So this we actually do have 2 pretty different sites and their natural references. My data is from chamber measurements that have been made approximately every 3 to 4 weeks in each of these sites and their natural references. Each site has 10 to 15 soil colors, which were measured with dark chambers for methane and outside growing season respiration, and then with the transparent chambers to measure the net ecosystem exchange during the summer months. And these were accompanied by automated measurements of soil temperature and soil water level and sunlight power, photosynthetically active radiation. And these chamber measurements were used to estimate the annual balances of methane and net ecosystem exchange. So essentially, I was making models to fill the gaps between the measurement days in order to get an intact annual data set. So for methane, the dynamics of methane in the peatland soil is a bit complicated. So based on flux measurements alone, it is quite challenging to find useful mechanistic models that could be used for estimating fluxes between these measurement periods. So although these methane cycling processes are essentially driven by soil temperature, the dynamics of the consumption and production processes are modulated by, for example, soil water table. So it's not really easy to find models that can easily catch these relationships. So in this measurement year, 2024, there was a period of time in the summer when the water table decreased down to minus 20 centimeters, which is enough for me to be interested in how that affects the methane flux on top of how the temperature affects. So to be able to estimate the methane balance, I used these generalized additive models, which are empirical models that predict the methane flux as a combination of temperature-driven and soil water table-driven effects in a way that it handles the sort of covariance of these variables by shrinking out the effect if there is redundance with the temperature and water level. But in generally, the challenge in this methane measurement data is that it was very noisy due to probably ebullition of these bubbles had something to do that I had quite high fluxes in there, which resulted in quite high estimates. I'll get to that later. But because there is this microtopographical spatial variation in peatland sites, we measured hummocks, hollows, and cotton grass colors separately. This is highlighted in Kureso site, which had the clearest abundance of cotton grass, and this plot shows how the cotton grass tussocks are transporting methane from the deeper levels of the soil, and these GAM models were catching that difference between cotton grass, hummock, and hollow. So hollows in the middle also emit a bit more methane because they are generally wetter all along, whereas these hummocks become drier faster and or are already drier, so they are smaller emitters of methane. As for the annual balances based on these GMM models, the methane fluxes are quite high. In case of Valkeraba, they're actually extremely high, and there might be several reasons why is that. But if we look at Kureso, we can see that this natural site didn't have cotton grass plants, while the restored one has plenty. So the difference between Kureso methane, the restored site, is probably this much higher due to this abundance of the cotton grass, which is transporting methane from the soil. Okay, net ecosystem exchange. So in the winter time outside growing season, the net ecosystem exchange is the same as soil respiration. So to estimate soil respiration outside growing season, we used the dark chamber measurements and used this Lloyd and Taylor soil respiration model. During the growing season, the same Lloyd and Taylor respiration model was fitted to shaded transparent chambers, so essentially night made for the measurements. And then the net ecosystem exchange with light availability was modeled from a series of measurements where the transparent chamber was shaded to get different levels of light into the chamber area. So So the net ecosystem exchange model was this Michaelis-Menten kinetics-based light response model, which had a respiration offset, and by replacing the R in the model, I was able to with the Sloyd and Taylor models, I was able to get the net ecosystem exchange estimations for the growing season, and then the annual balance was compiled from these different blocks of modeled data. So the result from CO2 C side was that in both Kureso and Valkeraba, the restored and natural sites were very much closely, almost identical in terms of the CO2 balance. Valkeraba site generally has higher production to all directions, also seen in the methane, but for the question whether these restored sites have reached the state of the natural sites, then in CO2, I would say that 7 years post-restoration, they have. These CO2 balances, they are showing a net source of CO2 from all of these sites for last year. It's a moderate source, which is not fully typical for this long-term estimations from this type of sites. So what remains to be seen is will this trend continue also from this year's data, which will soon land on my desk. But in the end, to draw this together, CO2C wise, the sites are natural and restored sites are becoming almost identical. But with methane, if not saying anything about the magnitude of the fluxes, but comparing the natural and the restored sites, in the restored sites, which has abundance of cotton grass, which is a very typical vegetation for disturbed peatlands, the cotton grass is also a known transporter of methane, so that really contributes to the overall methane flux of these restored sites. So that makes a difference in one of the sites. Why is Valkeraba such a high source of methane? I need to do some more raking of the data to see what's going on, but I think that the natural and the restored site are actually not as different as they could be from each other. They're quite close by each other, and there is also probably edge effect from these nearby forested and clear-cut areas also to the natural site. So I think that there might be some even minerotrophic effect from that could explain some of the differences. But that is all I have about this, and here are some links about ALFAwetlands.
Okay, Sala, thank you so much for the presentation. Very interesting, also for me, because I work a lot within REWET in the modeling part and modeling activities. So for me, it has been very, very interesting. I think that there are no questions on the chat, so we can continue with the next presentation. So it's time for the biodiversity topic, ground beetles as wetland restoration indicators, by Ralph Verdonschot. So Dr. Ralph Verdonschot is a senior researcher at Wageningen Environmental Research in the Netherlands, and he is specialized in wetland ecology, ecological restoration, and monitoring and assessment of environmental quality based on the wetland fauna. So please, Ralph, the floor is yours, so go ahead.
Thank you, Fran. I will share my screen. Yes. So I'm going to talk about biodiversity. Let's see my slides are not changing. Okay, yes, I'm going to present something about biodiversity, a completely different topic in comparison to the other topics which were presented before. And I will especially focus on one of the fauna groups, which is indicative of wetland quality, and that are ground beetles. So first, wetlands. Yeah, wetlands are one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world. If you look at the total biodiversity, it's estimated that approximately more or less 40% of all species are associated with wetlands. And the cause of that is that wetlands contain very complex habitat mosaics. So you have a lot of spatial and temporal dynamics and environmental factors creating all kind of gradients within the landscape, from wet to dry, nutrient rich to nutrient poor. So that a mosaic, which also changes, for example, because of flooding and drying, creates a lot of opportunities for species to complete their life cycle. So you have a mosaic with a lot of opportunities for all kind of species. So that causes a very high biodiversity. At the same time, we see that there's extensive loss of wetlands throughout the world. For example, in Europe, it's estimated that approximately 2/3 of the wetlands are lost or severely degraded. And that's caused by drainage and water abstraction. For the peatlands, especially peat extraction to use as fuel, infilling to change the land use, pollution, for example, water quality issues. All those factors have led to an extensive decline of wetland area. And with the decline, you also see severe biodiversity declines. And because, as I said before, you have all those specialists living in specific conditions within those wetlands, all those wetland habitat specialists are threatened. At the same time, there's also positive news, because what you see is that there is an increasing number of restoration projects going on. Triggered by all kind of environmental legislation, there are a lot of initiatives to restore wetlands. And many of those restoration projects involve rewetting measures. So that's interesting to look at the effects of those measures on biodiversity. And what's important if you want to assess the effects of restoration on biodiversity is that all those different species use wetlands on different scales. All the species have to have a certain life cycle, and during that life cycle, they use certain elements of the wetland. And it could be a very large range. For example, birds use wetlands on a very large scale. But at the same time, you also have species which really are confined to, for example, 1 square meter within the wetland, one wet to dry gradient, for example. What you see in beetles, for example, beetles lives on the edge of between water and land, and that's the area where they complete their life cycle. So if you want to determine restoration success, that means that you have to match your target species group with the effects of the restoration measure. So if the effects are very small, for example, you increase the water level and it affects your vegetation, for example, you choose an indicator which matches that change in conditions. In wetland restoration studies, one of the groups which is often used are ground beetles. Ground beetles are beetles, the Carabidae, called in Latin, and they're often used as bioindicator to assess effects of wetlands restoration. Why? Because it's a very abundant and species-rich insect group. Because the taxonomy of the group is very well known. There are a lot of identification keys to identify them to species level, and also there's a lot known about the ecology and traits of those species. So you can link species to environmental conditions. What's also very positive of this group is that they're fast responding to environmental changes. They're quite mobile, so that means that they can colonize restored sites very fast. So you can expect changes already within a year or several years. And finally, they're easy to collect. You can simply either catch them in the field or catch them with traps in a standardized way. So in the REWET project, we also looked at ground beetles, and in the REWET project, our objective was to investigate if ground beetles show positive responses to wetland restoration along a European gradient. So the open labs are mentioned before, and in all those open labs, we look at the response of the beetles to restoration. What we did was install transects of pitfall traps at the different sites and to compare restoration outcomes. So you had often restored sites and not non-restored sites, and we compared those, or other restoration techniques. The beetles were identified to species level, and based on the collected species and their abundance, we did taxonomic and a trait-based analysis, looking at, for example, the richness and abundance of species, the habitat specialists, so the hygrophilous or moisture-loving animals, which are really associated with wetlands. And we also looked at the functional metric, and it was biomass, to see if there are biomass changes within the community. And that biomass is important because it's a functional parameter. So if you have a higher biomass, that has consequences, for example, for the food web, or also ecosystem processes like decomposition of organic matter and those kind of things. So now I give 3 examples of ground beetle studies we did in different open labs. The first open lab is the open lab in the Netherlands. It was the Werebenwiede National Park. And there, restoration was composed of transforming former agricultural grasslands into fen peatland meadows, which is a specific vegetation type associated with this kind of peatlands. So the measures there were rewetting, so increasing the groundwater level, periodic flooding of the area to flush out excess nutrients, and also mowing of the vegetation to get rid of excess nutrients. Because remember, it was a former agricultural grassland, so that means that it was fertilized in the past. So before you can restore such an area, that means that you have to really remove the nutrients from the soil. So that was done with those measures, and the restoration measures were going on already for several decades, and that resulted in basically 3 restoration states. You have fields which are poor in nutrients and wet. You have fields which are still rich in nutrients and wet, and you have also nutrient-rich fields which are dry. So that's basically a control situation, the situation which is not restored. So we looked at the response of those of ground beetles to those measures, and what we saw was that there was a clear benefit of the restoration measures in the case that the most nutrient-poor wet fields contained the highest number of species, the highest abundance or activity density of the beetles, and also the highest biomass. So reducing the nutrient concentrations in those fields really had an effect on the habitats or the wetland habitat specialists. At the same time, we showed that in the richer fields, which were also re-wetted, there was still a lower number of species, more comparable to the control sites, and also a lower abundance. Only the biomass was increasing of the wetland specialist species. So that was an interesting outcome of the open lab in the Netherlands, where we really saw effects of restoration measures. Another open lab was situated in Austria. It's the Markek-Morava River floodplain, and in that project, the restoration measures are associated with the vegetation management in the floodplain. So the floodplain was reconnected to the river to reestablish a semi-natural flooding regime in the area. And at the same time, vegetation management was installed to keep the floodplain meadows in the area open, because if you don't manage those grasslands, then they transform into floodplain forests. So the managers there want to keep those meadows open, and they do that at the one hand by mowing, which is more or less the natural or the standard procedure of keeping those meadows open. And a new form of management there was grazing. So horses, Konig horses and cattle was introduced on the meadows to keep those meadows open. So in our study, we compared those two situations. So grazed grasslands on the one hand and mowed grassland on the other hand. So what was the response of the ground beetles in this situation? We saw that the species richness of the wetland specialist was the same in both the mowed and the grazed meadow. But if you look at the activity density, the abundance, and the biomass, there was there were higher values recorded in the mowed situation in comparison to the grazed situation. So here you see that the beetles respond to the way the vegetation is managed. Finally, the third example, it's from the Betsch catchment in the Ardennes in Belgium. It's a completely different situation. It's a more Central European hilly area where nature managers are working on the restoration of flow-through mires on the hill slopes of the Ardennes. What's done there is that there was a spruce forest plantation. The spruce forest is removed. And to grow spruce forest, that means that those hillsides have to be drained. So there were a lot of drainage ditches dug in the area. Those drainage ditches are closed or blocked to re-wet the entire area and to restore the mire like it was in a natural situation. In this open lab, there are measurements of beetles before and after the restoration measures took place. And that's not the logging, but it was the closing and the blocking of the drainage channels, which is compared. And traps to collect beetles were placed near the former drainage channels and farther away from the drainage channels in some higher areas. So what we did was look at the situation before and after restoration. If we look at this comparison, we see that before and after restoration, there was regarding the number of species in the traps, we saw that there was an effect of the restoration. There was the before and after situation was compared. I didn't mention that with a site where already the drainage ditches were blocked earlier, so several years ago. So that acted as some kind of reference or future state condition. And if you look at the before and after comparison, which I show here in the graph in different colors, you see that in the future state there was no difference in wetland species per trap. But if you look at the before-after comparison far from the channel and near the channel, you see that there is a clear increase in the number of species after restoration. So more wetland species came in after the restoration measures. Same holds for the activity density or the number of individuals of wetland species. They also increased after restoration. If we look at the biomass, we see only an effect near the channel. So you see wetland species increasing, or the total biomass of wetland species increasing after restoration. So again, we see an effect on the ground beetles of the restoration measures. So these are preliminary results, and we're going to make those kind of comparisons also for the other open labs in the coming year. To conclude, overall, we see in those case studies that there are clear responses of ground beetles to restoration measures. That's an important finding because what we see is that restoration really affects those wetland-associated species. So that means that restoration measures are doing something to the habitat specialist or the typical wetland species. So that's an important finding because that means that it seems to work, the measures. What's also important is that we do not only see effects in the taxonomic biodiversity metrics, so the number of species or abundance, but we also see a clear functional response. So in a response of an increasing biomass. And that's important because biomass is really associated with, for example, the food web or the ecosystem functioning. That means that restoration not only affects the biodiversity per se, but also it could also affect the function of the wetland ecosystem, which is an important outcome because that means that the whole ecosystem is going to function differently after the restoration measures. And with those specialist species, that is likely to be an improvement of the ecosystem function. What we also see is that the restoration measures, it's not only the rewetting which causes effects. We also see effects of nutrients, see effects of the vegetation management. So if you want to fully restore a wetland, that means that rewetting alone is probably not enough. You really have to restore also other environmental factors to meet the habitat requirements of the different species which inhabit a wetland. So a multi-factor restoration strategy is needed to fully restore biodiversity in those wetlands. So that was it. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for the presentation. Very, very clear. And we are a bit out of time, so let's continue with the next presentation. But after Eulogio presentation, we will go straight with the coffee break. And after the coffee break, we will continue with the presentation of the WETSET by Juan, okay? But now it's time for the presentation of the modeling biodiversity and ecosystem services under future climate scenarios by Eulogio Chacón. And wait a second. Yes, so Eulogio Chacón Moreno is an ecologist specializing in landscape ecology, species distribution modeling, and climate resilient biodiversity refuges. With his PhD from ITC and Wageningen University, he works as a researcher and consultant at the Climate Research Foundation, advancing nature-based solutions for biodiversity conservation and climate change adaptation. So, please, Eulogio, the floor is yours. You're muted, so please unmute yourself.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you very much for your coming to this webinar. And we'll present what's happened. Modeling biodiversity and ecosystem services under future climate scenarios. This is a part of contribution in the REWET project. And what I want to talk is how to model biodiversity and ecosystem services under future climate scenarios. And we will to talk about just an approach. We have several approaches to do that, but we are focused on two approaches. The first is modeling the distribution of plant species under climate change scenarios, and the second is assess the impact of climate change on biodiversity and ecosystem services using conservation standard approach or framework. But first, for that, is what we expect from restoration. From the last presentation of Ralph, we understand the importance and about diversity in the restoration, and also the importance for carbon sequestration and accumulation. And from these things, we think that the restoration process is a part of succession of vegetation successes that come in from try to get the initial ecosystem that will be like here, like ER0. And from that, when this is used by different impact, we start a restoration process, and we plant some species that is natural, known that they are in these areas. Then the normal process of restoration in get or reaching our target restoration, that is the base on the conception of restoration. But what happened when climate change is included into this view is that in that process, during this time, let's say 1 year, 2 years, or many years, 30 years or more, the climate change is impact this process of restoration. Therefore, under future climate scenarios, it is crucial to understand how the biodiversity associated to this picture of we once about ecosystem restored will respond to be affected. Then many of these chains could be modified that what wants at the end. And then plants that now are planted will be not there at the future. Then for this problem, for this part, we try to focus on two approaches. The first is species distribution models. What is this species distribution model? It's an approach that includes the possibility to see in the spatial area what is the suitability of the ecological distribution of the suitability for plants. And then this is starting with a model approach to try to understand how, starting from data of the species present, will have a model of this suitability in the area. And from this, we include now, we have the baseline suitability pattern distribution, and then using this pattern distribution and this model, this equation, we can construct or we can go to the species distribution under future climate. Then for that, we need two ingredients very special. First, the data of the species that cover more of the large area, because we need to know the gradient, the long gradient of the species distribution, and in this case in Europe, because all the species and the open lab are in Europe. And of course, have important environmental data. And the process for construction this suitability distribution model is a selection of the variables. Which more variables have, the model will be better understand the distribution. And we are using an approach to ensemble modeling that give up three algorithms to use it: generalized linear model, gradient boosting machine, and random forest. And of course, all these models, these mathematical or statistical models, is include a calibration and evaluation process. And with this, we obtain a equation to modeling and the spatial distribution of the suitability for each plant. Then that we have for that, in this project, we're using bioclimatic variables, 25 variable climatic variables plus 4 data of soil, and we have then 29 biobars. 11 is a thermal biobars, 8 about precipitation, 6 about evapotranspiration, and 4 related to data, soil data, nitrogen, pH, soil, organic carbon, and sand. All this data is for all Europe at a scale of 250 meters pixel size. That's important because it's a high resolution for this kind of place that is enormous in area. Then the second ingredient is the species, and with the help of the open lab coordinators, and we select around 80 species that could be used in the restoration process for each open lab, and this get down the species data from all Europe using the HIBIS database, and we explain the distribution like this map. And you have now here in this map, you can see the size, let's say the big size, the overlap one respect to the area in Europe, and some points are very small. Then we use, for example, this species. This is Meniantes trifoliata, and this is our only points of the distribution, and we can see at the different places of the open lab where is the data about this species. And with this data plus the environmental, we can run the baseline suitability pattern distribution, like the example for this species, showing the suitability in green and a little bit less in yellow and nothing in gray. And this is the distribution of this species, the baseline for each open lab. You can see for one open lab what each open lab the distribution for this species. This is one species. Now, what we do is using this baseline pattern or model, we project the distribution about all the 7 open lab using the bioclimatic projection in 4 SSP and 3 time periods for 10 ESM for a total of 120 projections for each open lab. Then we have, let's say, 10 Earth system models using in this project, and for each Earth system model, we have to the 25 bioclimatic variables, and we project these also models in 4 shared socioeconomic pathway from the less impact to the more problem scenarios. And we use 3 time of scenarios of 30 years that is corresponding with a climatic period, 21, 50, 41, 70, and 71 to 100 at the end of the period. And we model now using like the model of distribution of each species to construct, let's say, this is one output of for Biden Cernua and species, how change in just one scenario, and from this we can now make the suitability projection under future climate scenarios for each open lab, and this is an example of how it's changed along the time and also along the scenarios, and we can see if in this case these species can be shift and change and maybe disappear along the time. And after that, we can use this to combine or reduce the uncertainty of climate in different ways to reduce the information and make this information more available for stakeholders. The second approach is ecosystem service. And this is a test for understand from a conceptual model of how each open lab is constructed in biodiversity, and this biodiversity gives us ecosystem service, how there is the impact analysis, this impact on the climate change. For that, we construct a conceptual model where using, let's say this is for one open lab, try to understand each biodiversity targets and which kind of ecosystem services provide by this biodiversity and also human well-being target related to this ecosystem service. This is the base how to understand how ecosystem services could be changed and could be affected by climate change. And now on that, we try to understand how climate change at the future in different scenarios could be impact these ecosystem services. For that, we can estimate the different change, and this is an example for thermal variables of the bioclimatic variables from different scenarios. We have in green the current data from these variables and how can be changed and different variables, and we can see if this change is more clear or is bigger in the warmest quarter or warmest months than the coldest, and how is this change. And with this difference, we can include now and try to understand, this is a test model where we can have the direct threat, especially associated to climate, and how change and impact these biodiversity targets and how this can affect the ecosystem service. This is a test of model, an approach to see how a specific change in thermal precipitation or a specific time this of thermal change during the winter or during the summer can affect the physiology of the plant, can affect the acceleration of the composition, and how can affect the open lab in general, and this affect the ecosystem service. All these these two approaches give you an ideas of first climate-driven, especially species distribution model, may help identify potential shift in plant suitability across the open labs to know which species are more suitable or less suitable or even don't change. Integrating these outputs into the conservation standard framework can clarify assumption, even risk and adaptation needs in the open lab. And together, using these two approaches, we can support the exploration of climate robust restoration strategies into or within REWET project. Well, this is all for this. Thank you very much. And this is our team, Jaime Rivalagua and Emma Gaitan, with me like coordinator of this project, this work package and these results, and Marta Fernandez, Carlos Prado, Lorena, and Clara as part of the team project. Thank you very much. And this is our consortium, and we can contact through this email address. Thank you very much for your attention.
So the next presentation is WETSET, your one-stop shop for European wetlands data, and it will be presented by Juan Serratosa. Juan is a biologist, holds a master's degree in geographic information systems, and also a PhD in ecology and applied biology. His main research fields focus on spatial ecology and biodiversity conservation. And throughout his professional career, he has worked across various types of organizations, including environmental consulting firms, conservations, NGOs, and research institutions. So please, Juan, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for the presentation, Fran, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you who are joining us. So I'm gonna share my screen. So in this presentation, we're gonna talk about this product that was created by Eddy. Hopefully you can see the presentation now. It's called WETSET, okay? But what it is, WETSET. So WETSET is a comprehensive online data index at the European level that centralizes information about wetland datasets from European, national, and regional databases, okay? So this website provides a central platform for accessing diverse wetland-related data that aims to streamline research and assessment efforts on wetlands, okay? The idea is that the WETSET will serve as a way to address the challenges that sometimes some stakeholders have when trying to find specialized information in an easy and efficient way, okay? So WETSET provides an easy way of navigating and discovering information of utility, useful data. So how we have done this? So we have done a systematic web research to find for all these datasets and databases that hold this information, focusing on freshland wetlands, floodplains, and peatlands. Okay, so those are the wetlands types that we cover. And we have been focusing on the data because, as we're going to see later on, we have other tools that can help you find information about articles or reports, okay? The data sets that we have been identifying cover a variety of topics from biodiversity, hydrology, soil, etc. And we have done a systematic characterization of these data sets by extracting 24 parameters of information, like the variables that they include, the temporal extent, the resolution, who is the producer, how you can access that data. And we have created a website with all this information, okay? So providing tools for that, to look into these different data sets and search and discover the information that it may be useful for any stakeholder. And since it's easier for me to show what it is, WETSET, than to explain it, we're gonna go directly to the website, okay? This is part of, WETSET is part of a data hub that in REWET we have created that is called the multi-stakeholder platform, okay? And in this hub, we have different websites that are dedicated to different type of data. So we have a knowledge hub in which you can find reports, papers, scientific literature that could help you in getting information about wetlands. We have WETSET, which is focusing on data sets, on data like maps, tabular data. We have a space for collaborations and also a space in which we have incorporated reports and policy documents that can be helpful also. This was created by Neya, and we have been creating the WETSET, okay? So this is the landing page of the website. As you can see, we have already identified more than 240 data sets. And as you scroll down, you have all the different data sets that are available to check and to look for information. The important thing is that we have provided some tools for navigating within all this ecosystem. So for instance, if I type land cover and I do a search, I will get that there are 24 different data sets that are related to that topic that I've been filtering by. So we have, for instance, decorated land cover, a well-known data source of information. And once we get into the data set, we have all the information related to this data set. So we have a small description, we know who is the producer, we have a link in which we can go to the actual data, download it, and access the actual data set. But you have here a small summary that can make you think if this is the correct data set that you're looking for or not, okay? So you have also the temporal extent and all different information that can be useful for you to determine if this is a useful data for your research or your needs, okay? Another tool that we have implemented is a search filters. So instead of writing the keyword that you want to look for, you can clear the filters and go into, for instance, select a topic, okay? So maybe you're interested in soil data, then you press filter, and you will get, in this case, 58 different data sets that are related to this topic that you have been looking for. As we did before, for instance, I think this is a useful data set for me. I click on it, it opens in a different window, and I can see if actually this is the information that I was looking for. This is a map. This is in a map format. You have here the dataset type. You see it's 300 meters resolution. So maybe this is a dataset that is useful for you to use. Okay. And then lastly, you have different filters here that you can apply to look into the data and look for different information. And lastly, we are developing, this is under develop, it's an interactive map in which you will get a view of the data sets, but in a spatial format, let's say. So for instance, this is a mock data set that I created the other day. So this is information from the wetland that is here in Malaga. So you can see that you have here the data set. You, as we were doing before, you press on the data set and you get the information from this particular data set. Also, the map is going to be showing all the information that is especially within the window of the map. So if I move away from this, the dataset will disappear. So you will have charging all the different data sets that are in the view of your window. And the idea is that you could navigate through your maybe wetland of interest, go into it and see what are the data sets available for that particular area that you're interested in. And I think that's mostly all from me. You have the help section where it identifies the most common questions. This is an open database, so anyone who has some data sets that think are useful for the community can join, include a new data set, click on new data set, include the data, and upload the information. As I was saying, it's not a data repository, it's an index of data sets. You will have to host the actual data if you want to provide access to it, okay? And my presentation is very short, so thank you very much for having me, and I think that's all from my side.
Thank you so much, Juan, for the presentation. I must admit that I'm in love with the final result of the WETSET, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And okay, so now it's time to continue. Okay, the next presentation is about social monitoring preliminary results by Patrick Graff. So Patrick is a research associate at the Behavioral Economics and Engineering Research Center at KU Leuven in Belgium, an interdisciplinary center dedicated to studying human decision-making and behavior in economic contexts. His research focuses on human behavior related to nature-based solutions and sustainable decision-making. Patrick's previous experience includes working as a junior consultant in European public affairs in Brussels with a focus on sustainability, energy, and mobility, as well as serving as a lecturer in European studies in Maastricht. So, Patrick, now the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Fran. I hope you hear me well. I will share my presentation. Okay. Okay, let me see. Yes, here we go. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Perfect. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My part is indeed about the social monitoring, so the social aspect that is also part of the REWET project. Before I continue with the preliminary outputs, it might be good to contextualize a bit the social aspect within the REWET project. So in REWET, our overall goal is to develop a long-term climate mitigation strategy that brings together effective wetland restoration, management, and monitoring approaches. And well, whenever I think of REWET, I like to think of the project as a jigsaw puzzle, because each partner contributes a crucial piece, and each piece has its own shape and purpose. But it's only when we put them together that the full picture becomes clear. And one particular important piece of this puzzle is social acceptance, because without public understanding and support, the picture simply remains incomplete. So no matter how advanced the other parts of the project may be. And this is exactly where KU Leuven comes in. Our role in REWET is to focus on the social dimension, meaning understanding how people perceive wetland restoration, but also what conditions support or hinder these acceptance. As an initial project output, we developed the social monitor for ecosystem restoration, which is abbreviated with SOMER, so S-O-M-E-R. This instrument is designed as a standardized modular monitoring tool that can be applied across time, cases, and regions to capture how social acceptance of ecosystem restoration evolves and varies spatially. And this SOMER tool can be applied in both survey as well as interview context. So about the social monitor, a bit more in detail, the social monitor is operationalized through three facets. We have nature connectedness, we have perception and attitudes towards climate change, and thirdly, perceived costs and benefits of wetland restoration. The rationale here is that if we don't understand how individuals value nature and how they recognize climate change as a global challenge, then social acceptance of wetlands and the restoration will remain fragmented. And the overview I put here for you in this PowerPoint, it gives you a sense of how we address social acceptance in our work. Briefly explain to you these three facets. So first of all, we have nature connectedness. So this facet captures actually individuals' overall relationship with nature, and this construct is generally associated with a positive sentiment. A stronger connectedness to nature is typically linked to feelings of appreciation, care, and emotional attachment towards the nature. Then if we look at facet 2, which is perception and attitudes towards climate change, this in contrast focuses on the perceptions of climate change, which is often associated with concern and negative sentiment. What is meant by negative sentiment? Well, while nature connectedness reflects a more harmonious and effective relationship with nature that supports the well-being and encourages pro-environmental behavior, perceptions of climate change tend to highlight a threat and risk, because climate change is eventually a risk for all of us. And then the third facet, which is perceived costs and benefits of wetland restoration, that's really the core part of the social monitor, as it looks at how people view natural ecosystems, such as wetlands and the restoration. And such activities can be seen both positively. Think about biodiversity and flood protection. These are really good things, but also negatively. So let's say possible costs or land use restrictions for stakeholders. So therefore, this module reflects the mixed sentiment, showing that both the positive and the negative sides people may perceive at the local level. So to go a bit further with the SOMA and the work we have carried out, here is a very nice overview, I think, of what we have done regarding the surveys. So we conducted surveys and interviews, and here you can see the survey participation. Data collection has posed difficulties since it relies, or we rely on stakeholders' willingness to take part in surveys. And one aspect that plays a role is really geographic conditions, because some of the open labs are located in densely populated regions, such as the one in the Netherlands, Austria, and also Italy, while others are more situated in less populated areas. For example, the open lab in Finland, even in Belgium. So this creates an ongoing challenge for fostering the social dimension. But even though we have these challenges, which might be very often quite frustrating, I think that nonetheless, in that light, the participation rate we have reached so far is especially encouraging. And that's not only regarding the surveys, but also regarding the interviews. Even with this inherent challenges of engaging stakeholders, we successfully completed 17 interviews up to now. And of course, we are hoping for more interviews to come during the last year of this beautiful project. Regarding the interviews then, what kind of stakeholders did they include? Well, farmers, teachers, local policymakers, and of course, several other stakeholder groups. Then the key takeaways of our research so far. So first of all, regarding ecological awareness. So our preliminary findings suggest that overall, at least, participants demonstrated a relatively high level of awareness regarding wetlands. Across the open labs, wetlands were widely recognized as important for supporting local flora, fauna, and this can reflect a general understanding within communities of the ecological functions and biodiversity value that wetlands provide. Then if we look at recreational perceptions and contrast these perceptions, well, they are concerning recreational importance of wetlands. And here the participants were more divided. Many respondents did not view recreation as a primary or defining function of wetlands. However, these perceptions, and it's important to note that, they vary notably between the open labs. So for instance, the most recent measurements revealed that recognition of wetland recreational role was highest among respondents in Austria, whereas lower levels of recognition were observed in Italy, Finland, and the Netherlands. But well, these cross-country differences may reflect variations in local environmental contexts or culture related to outdoor activities. However, and I really want to stress this, that such interpretations, of course, remain tentative and would require further analysis to support. Well, there's more. So restoration perspectives. When we look at perceptions of wetland restoration among advocates and opponents, we see that advocates tend to associate restoration with urgent climate concerns. And they're really concerned. Maybe they have experienced more drought, more participation, and so on. So they have a they really link restoration to, well, or we can link it to broader ecological values related to biodiversity and habitat protection. But in contrast, we not only have people who are really favored about REWET and the things we are doing, we also have those who are more opposed to restoration activities. And they often perceive restoration of wetlands as a potential threat to their personal, but also to their professional livelihoods. For example, through changes in land use or economic restrictions. I think that's also a very valid point that should be taken into consideration also for later studies. Last but not least, another important aspect is, of course, the gender aspect. So we have gender insights as well. With regard to gender, female participation was slightly higher across the open labs. However, no substantial gender-based differences were observed. In interviews, male participants tended to articulate somewhat greater skepticism toward wetland restoration. But it should be noted, however, that these observations are based on a small, non-representative convenience sample, of course, and therefore remain tentative. Yeah, so in this respect, we hope also during the upcoming last year of the project to get more insights into all of these 4 core aspects. But we are already preparing for follow-up studies, so I really think that we will do good in that sense, and that we will have more takeaways from now and a year onwards. So far, yeah, thank you for listening to me. These were the key takeaways and insights into the social aspect within this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for reflecting the importance of social sciences in our project. So, okay, it's time to continue with the next presentation. And at the end, I will ask some final questions that are currently in the chat. But from now, we will continue with the final presentation on policy for wetland restoration by Kaspar Berber and Hannah Porada. So, Hannah Porada works as environmental justice expert at UCN in Netherlands, and her work spans Latin America and Europe, addressing environmental and water justice themes. Previous to joining UCN, Hannah conducted her PhD research in the field of political ecology at the University of Amsterdam. And on the other hand, Kaspar Berber has been working for over 13 years as a senior ecologist at UCN in Netherlands, where he has been managing a wide array of nature conservation projects in Indonesia and the Amazon region. Before this, he worked at Guggenheim Environmental Research to study climate and biodiversity impacts of tropical peatland conversion. Since over 5 years, he has been involved in various European projects on nature restoration, and for REWET, he has been looking into the policy angle of wetland restoration. So please now, Kaspar, Hannah, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks for that introduction, Fran. I'll start with a brief sketch of the policy arena related to upscaling wetland restoration, and after that, my colleague Hannah will take over to focus more on pathways for scaling up restoration. Yes, so first, I'd like to share this map. Was published a few years ago by Nature, and it shows the global wetland loss over the past 3 centuries. What it reveals is that some 20% of all wetlands has been lost globally, and Europe was among the worst affected areas, with, for example, Ireland losing over 90% of its wetlands, Germany, Lithuania, Hungary, more than 80%, and also the UK, Netherlands, Italy, more than 75%. So this is these are very high numbers. But on the other hand, by now, in the next slide, the importance of wetlands has been recognized globally. And so over the past few decades, a number of global initiatives to restore degraded areas, degraded wetlands, that number significantly increased, and as you see in this slide, have also received wide global support. Initiatives describe pretty ambitious targets for conservation and restoration of ecosystems. Also, it's now being acknowledged that climate change and biodiversity loss must be tackled together. Next slide. With a strong emphasis on protecting and restoring carbon-rich habitats. Yeah, as you all know, so during the UN Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, there was a landmark agreement reached to protect nature, a deal that included a provision to restore at least 30% of degraded inlet water bodies and conserve healthy fresh water ecosystems. And there were many more goals. So the next slide shows the total 23 targets that were agreed on back then. And then, yeah, the important question though is, how is the world going to pay for all this? Because another study, next slide, showed that investments in nature-based solutions must at least triple to reach the global climate and biodiversity targets. So this is a big challenge. And if you go to the next slide, so that's one. It's also being discussed, by the way, in the current climate talks in Belém. But investing in nature-based solutions would not be enough. So that's necessary on one hand. On the other hand, it's also needed to phase out the harmful practices, which are still being pushed by industry stakeholders and also enabled by local and national and also international policies and financial streams. So that's important to realize. Well, many of the global goals and agreements are not legally binding or strongly legally binding, and they depend on commitments of signatories. And those commitments, yeah, they can be prone to political realities in the countries. And therefore, safeguarding and restoring wetlands will really require very strong international and national incentives that enable to break with business as usual kind of development. So if you go to the next, the global treatments, global agreements and initiatives, of which you saw a few already, and they form the basis for EU policies. And then in turn, these EU policies form the basis for national policies in the EU member states. There are quite some EU policies that are relevant to wetlands and either positively or negatively affect them. You can see a number of them in this slide. For example, the nature restoration regulation, but also in the lower right corner, there's some agriculture-related policies. For example, well, most importantly, the CAP, Common Agriculture Policy. This is crucial because agriculture has been a main driving force for wetland reclamation, and also resulted in eutrophication and pollution, which has led to the poor conservation status of many of the European wetlands today. So this has long been and still is being promoted actually by the CAP subsidies. Although with the latest reforms of the CAP, the whole system is gradually, becoming a bit greener. Next slide. So if you look at that policy environment in the European Union, and overall, I think we can conclude the following things: that EU policies and legislation have been and are key in setting the norms and targets for nature and environment in EU member states. So some 70 to 90% of the environmental regulations, legislation in the member states is rooted in EU policies. But the level of implementation, has not resulted in the achievement of healthy states of wetlands as we would wish in Europe. At the same time, we know that without EU legislation, the situation would have been very much worse. So now I think the exciting question remains is whether the European Green Deal, which started off very ambitiously and which aims for a carbon neutral Europe in 2050, will be successful, in holding this downward spiral of biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. Next slide. One of the things is that we saw the coherence of the EU policies remains a challenge, particularly when it comes to the COP. And we have seen the ambition levels fall in the different Green Deal legal instruments, such as the Nature Restoration Regulation, and now also that EU funding for implementing these policies, for implementing restoration measures through programs like the EU Life program grants window, that's now under attack. So it is this funding that really plays a key role in enabling landowners and managers to carry out the restoration needed. And that lowering of ambition, that is something that we also observed at national level in the member states. Next slide. So these countries, we've seen a trend of decentralizing the responsibilities related to conservation. We've seen a lack of legal protection of wetlands and also legally binding environmental targets, especially outside of protected areas. We've seen poor enforcement, and the combination of this makes it very difficult to achieve the biodiversity goals. So, we also saw a lack of coherence of biodiversity and climate policies with other policies like spatial planning, for example, or extraction of natural resources and the mining, agriculture, and other economic developments. We see only very few financial incentives for landowners to conserve and restore wetland ecosystems. And what's also posing challenges is that historical land use practices not only have altered hydrology and ecological functioning, which would take long to recover, but also have shaped public attitudes towards wetlands over the years. And this links to the social acceptance Patrick was just talking about. So the key question is how member states could go ahead and accelerate restoration action. And for that, I'd like to hand over to Hannah now, who will further focus on possible pathways for this.
Yes, thank you, Casper. Hello from my side as well. I think Casper did a brilliant job in showing us the policy landscape and explaining that bit to us, and also really showing us the need to accelerate and upscale restoration of wetlands. And I'll now be diving more into the policy guidance that we have developed under the REWET project to really think how we can facilitate restoration action and upscaling. And as a first thing I want to mention here, this is related to the EU Nature Restoration Regulation that Casper already mentioned, and the political momentum that creates. We developed a theory of change, you could also say a framework or a practical guide that spells out how desired wetland restoration impacts can be achieved. And we have built this theory of change with insights from the implementation realities across the REWET Open Lab countries. And this is really thought to inform national and subnational policymakers. I want to stress that this framework we developed, it's not a single blueprint footprint contexts are very specific and different. How we have seen in the various presentations today, there are different opportunities and challenges in each place. But however, we think that they share certain key pathways that can facilitate wetland restoration. Among them are a clear and strong legal mandate, the political way to restoration. Public support is important as well. That also links very well to Patrick's presentation. And of course, economic viability is important too. And there also Caspar mentioned the need for stronger finance mechanisms. And then we try to formulate based on what we found different activities or subnational and national policy outputs that can contribute to achieving these pathways and getting on these pathways. And we also found certain cross-cutting risks and obstacles to wetland restoration under the nature restoration regulation. And these must really be addressed and thought through. Among them are things such as party politics, harmful subsidies that Caspar has also mentioned, vested industry interests, etc. Then next to the theory of change under REWET, we also have developed several policy briefs, and there are two that I'm gonna mention today that are also linked specifically to the nature restoration regulation. Basically, we in the first policy brief, we deal with the question of how member states can develop their national restoration plans, which they have to do until the end of August 2026 to meet wetland-specific targets, despite there being knowledge gaps and data gaps. And in this policy brief, we stress that there's a risk of delay due to perceived knowledge gaps and incomplete data, and that this can be challenge the formulation of the restoration plans. And the main point and argument we want to make in this policy brief, and that message we want to get across, is that these knowledge gaps exist. Knowledge will always be incomplete, but inaction is really not an option, and we know enough to begin. Restoration can start based on the best available knowledge, and then it can adapt with evolving knowledge. And in this policy brief, we also provide a set of empirical examples from the field where restoration was handled adaptively and then further developed with evolving knowledge. Then the second policy brief that I want to mention stresses again the opportunities that the development of the national restoration plans provide. And what we say here is that they are really a chance to firmly place wetlands on the national restoration agendas across member states. We provide different resources in this policy brief that can help facilitate the development of the national restoration plans. And we dive into the topic that was also mentioned by Caspar of the need for cross-policy synergies. And that really there's a need for coordinated action linking, for instance, water, agricultural, and climate policies and goals. And we also explain how certain synergies could be achieved. For instance, thinking about restoration policies and water policies, as wetlands, for instance, rely heavily on groundwater, and there's a need for integrated policy. Another example we dive into is the topic of agriculture and the common agricultural policy that Caspar already explained. Then we also briefly want to mention the idea of wetlands as a defense strategy. That's an idea that has been on everyone's lips recently. It's been much discussed in the media, and it's especially a subject of political debate in Eastern Europe for understandable reasons. We haven't developed a policy brief on this yet, but we wrote an opinion piece on it that you can find under this QR code And the idea is basically that restoring wetlands can serve not just climate and biodiversity goals, but also play a role in Europe's security. And the idea more specifically would be that wetlands are basically a natural barrier to slow and halt military movement. Now, we think that amid the changing security environment in Europe, that is definitely an interesting additional argument for rewetting. But if you read through our opinion piece, you will also see that we take a cautioning stance on this idea, in the sense that wetlands rewetting should not be the sole, for defense purposes, should not be the sole argument. Wetlands should not be reduced to a defense purpose only, because then there's really a high risk of sidelining other values and understandings of wetland. And poorly planned rewetting might also backfire. And it's important to really think about the ecological value that wetlands have, and also think through social justice implications and questions. Then I want to finish, I think, the last presentation of today just by recapping this presentation. Caspar has shown how there's really a big urgency to act. He also has explained the crucial role that wetlands play for in different senses, for instance, related to climate regulation, water retention, etc., biodiversity, and so on. And we have seen how wetland loss is really progressing, and we want to stress that we really must do everything to halt this trend and also preserve those wetlands that are still there. We've also shown the many challenges there are to do so, for instance, in terms of policy incoherence, the lack of political will, in terms of harmful subsidies, in terms of the lack of finance. But we hope to have also shown you that there are plenty of opportunities in terms of policies which can and must be used. And then we hope that restoration can be effective and lasting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Caspar, for your presentation and for reflecting the importance of policy in our REWET projects. Yeah, that's all. Thank you so much to all the speakers, to all the people that have attended online, and a big hug from Sevilla and from the REWET project in general.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.